Hey everyone, tonight we're going to talk about the strongest pirate ever. Not the type who yells, drinks rum, and then ruins his own career right away. So before you get settled in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And please tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who from all over the world is joining us. Now, turn down the lights and maybe turn on a fan for that soft. Let's start tonight's journey together with some background noise. When most people hear the word pirate, their brains immediately open a very specific filing cabinet. Inside, there are men yelling, rum spilling, and accents that change dramatically between continents. There is also at least one guy who hasn't brushed his teeth since the Middle Ages, which is impressive for pirates because it wasn't even the Middle Ages anymore. People think of pirates as people who wear hats and cause trouble. That picture makes me feel better. It's like a movie. It doesn't help at all with understanding how piracy really worked, and it's even worse for understanding the most powerful pirate in history. That's because chaos doesn't make empires. Chaos makes careers that don't last long, and long lists of last words that people wish they hadn't said. Piracy in real life, the kind that lasts, grows, and makes governments nervous, runs on structure, planning, and boring things like discipline, logistics, and not stabbing your coworkers during meetings. The pirates who lived the longest were not the loudest. They were the ones who made piracy seem less like a party and more like a very illegal shipping business. Most pirate crews were just waiting for something bad to happen. One unfair division of loot, one captain with too much pride and not enough brains, one fight fueled by warm rum and bad vibes, and suddenly half the crew is mutinying while the other half is falling into the sea. There was a pirate democracy, but it wasn't like a normal democracy where people talk things over. Instead, everyone voted while holding a knife. Now picture yourself walking into that place and calmly saying, "Okay, everyone, here are the rules. No random violence, no stealing from civilians, no freelancing, no emotional decision making, and no stupidity. And if you break these rules, you will be punished right away, clearly, and without any drama." This is the part of the movie where the pirates laugh. In real life, they listened because pirates didn't want things to get out of hand. They wanted to stay alive. They wanted to be paid. They wanted to stop dying because their captain made another. A brave but very dumb choice. It turns out that order is very appealing when the other option is drowning. This part is hard for history. People like pirates because they are lovable disasters. They don't want to admit that the most powerful pirate ever wasn't wild, drunk, or reckless. He was calm, organized, and very good at managing people. There are no parrots. There was no treasure buried, no inspirational yelling, just systems, rules, and a pirate empire that worked, which is honestly much scarier. Before she scared governments, made navies bow down, and made piracy a real job. History didn't pay much attention to young Yao because her life was so ordinary. In hindsight, this was a terrible mistake. She was born into a world that had already made a lot of choices for her. It had already decided that she would not rule, command or negotiate with an empire from a position of strength. There were no swords, ships, or dramatic speeches in her early life. Into the breeze, it was about survival, quiet, uncelebrated survival, the kind that teaches you to pay attention, listen, and remember who is in charge in a room. She worked in a floating brothel in Canton at one point. History loves to talk about this detail, usually with a raised eyebrow and a tone that makes it sound like it explains everything. No, it doesn't. What it does explain is that she was around powerful men who thought she was invisible when she was young. And men are very honest when they believe no one significant is. Hearing, she learned how deals were made, how egos worked, how promises were broken, and how power moved sideways instead of down. She learned that yelling didn't always give her power, and that the calmest people in the room were often the most dangerous. This was not a fairy tale when pirate Captain Zheng Yi came into her life. It was a chance, a partnership, and a way to work together strategically. She didn't get powerful all of a sudden when she married him. She was able to get in, getting to ships, crews, routes, and a hole. A floating underworld held together by bad habits and tradition. She saw everything that happened. She saw how captains fought, how loot was split up, how anger grew, and how violence fixed problems for a short time, but made new ones right away. Most pirates thought this chaos was going to happen. She thought it was a waste of time. History often skips this part because it's not very interesting. There are no fights here, no blasts, just a woman quietly taking in information while everyone else thought she was just a decoration. But this is where she got her real strength. She didn't have to make things up when the time came, and it would. She already knew everything there was to know about the pirate world, and, more importantly, how it didn't work. When Jung Yi came into her life, it wasn't a grand romance with moonlit decks and whispered promises over the sea. This was a business deal that came with a marriage license, and both sides knew that very well. Jung Yi was already a strong pirate leader in charge of a loose group of ships, of fleets that worked together when it was easy and fought all the time when it wasn't. It almost worked. It stayed alive thanks to tradition, fear, and the unspoken agreement that no one would ask too many questions as long as the loot kept coming. She didn't get power just by marrying him. Pirates didn't have very open-minded ideas about how to lead. The marriage gave her something much more valuable: closeness. She was suddenly close to captains, lieutenants, and people who made decisions. She heard arguments before they turned into mutinies. She saw how alliances came together and fell apart. She saw men hurt each other while claiming everything was fine. And most importantly, she saw patterns. She saw that pirate loyalty was weak, that crews followed strength over emotion, that captains who ruled by fear lasted longer than those who ruled by charm, but that fear alone wasn't enough. People needed things to be predictable, even if the rules were harsh. They needed to know them. Zheng Yi ran his. Fleet well by pirate standards. But pirate standards are not strict. Leadership was personal. Justice wasn't always fair. Punishments were based on mood, reputation, and how loud someone complained. People accepted chaos as a normal part of life, just like scurvy or bad hygiene. She didn't think chaos was unavoidable, she thought it was a waste. Young Yi led battles and made deals, but she quietly made friends. She talked to the captains, listened to their complaints, and made sure she wasn't seen as a competitor, but as a stabilizing force. Someone who kept their word. Someone who didn't drink before meetings. Someone who didn't always use a knife to settle a disagreement. Pirates saw this, even though they didn't fully understand why it was important yet. So when Young Yi died suddenly, not in a heroic or dramatic way, but in a way that was bad for business, the pirate world braced for the worst. People thought that problems that had been kept in check would get worse. Fleets should have broken up, rivals should have fought for control. Something else happened instead. Something that wasn't planned happened. She stepped forward calmly, ready, and already knew who would fight back and who would fall in line. That's when piracy stopped being a game and became a job. When Jungi died, the pirate world did what it always did when a leader died. It got scared, sharpened its knives, and began to quietly plan betrayals. Power didn't change hands easily in pirate confederations. They were known for accidents that happened out of the blue, people who went missing without a trace, and fights that ended with someone getting hurt, being thrown overboard in the middle of a sentence. Based on what has happened in the past, this should have been the end. There was no longer a strong leader. The captains of the opposing teams had old grudges. The territories of the fleets were the same. Everyone wanted a bigger piece of the pie. No one wanted to take orders from anyone else, especially not a woman. There were a lot of things about pirate culture, but being progressive wasn't one of them. So it was clear what was expected. The Red Flag fleet would break up. The captains would go their separate ways. Alliances would fall apart. The sea would be full of smaller, weaker pirate groups fighting each other instead of merchants. And for a short time, it almost did. The captains got together, voices got louder, old arguments came back up. Everyone was waiting for someone to do something, preferably something violent, because violence was common. Pirates used violence to settle their differences. No one expected patience. Young Yi didn't rush forward and say she was the ruler. She didn't make threats. She didn't beg. She didn't do the usual pirate thing of yelling loudly and daring someone to fight her. She waited instead. She let the stress grow. She let everyone say exactly what they wanted. Then she began to speak softly, one-on-one, and with a plan. She reminded the captains of the agreements that were already in place. She gave stability when things were about to go wrong. She promised that the rules would be clear and that punishments would not be random. And when persuasion didn't work, she made it very clear that she would not accept any kind of resistance, not emotionally, not dramatically, but efficiently. Pirates were very upset by this. They were used to leaders who ruled through anger or charm. She ruled by making things happen. Every choice that didn't involve following her ended badly, not right away, which would have been exciting, but slowly, painfully, and without any gain. And pirates, despite their bad reputation, were smart. The fleets came together in a matter of weeks. not because they suddenly respected her, but because she made it clear that fragmentation meant death and unity meant life. The numbers. The Red Flag Fleet did not fall apart. When it reorganized, piracy stopped being a loose criminal lifestyle and became something much more dangerous. A single mind at the top of a centralized power. It wasn't violence that made Jung Sao so dangerous. A lot of pirates were violent. She was different because she knew something that most leaders don't. If everyone knows you'll win, you don't need to swing a sword. She did not take power by fighting her enemies. Captains on the deck at dawn, there were no big fights, no speeches about fate, and no shouting into the sea breeze to get people excited. She did something much more disturbing instead. She put things in order. She didn't punish him at first. It was structure. She made the chains of command clearer. She confirmed the areas. She made sure that loot was given out in a fair way. Every captain knew what they were owed and when they were owed it, as well as what would happen if they tried to take more. It turns out that pirates act much better when accounting is. Not surprising, next came the rules. These were not vague pirate rules that you could ignore if you yelled loud enough. These were laws that were written down, learned, and followed. If you stole from civilians, you would be put to death. If you didn't follow orders, you would be killed. If you raped someone, you would be put to death. No arguments, no exceptions, and no dramatic appeals to pirate honor. The punishment was quick and public. Everyone was shocked by this, not because pirates suddenly didn't like violence, but because violence was no longer random. It was controlled, planned, and bureaucratic. Consistency is the one thing that scares criminals the most. Young Yo also knew how to use incentives. Loyalty was rewarded. Competence was encouraged. Captains who got results kept their ships. Leaders who caused trouble quietly stepped down. She didn't take them out of anger. She took them away in ways that felt like they had to happen, like gravity, and she listened. People often miss this part. She heard complaints. She changed her plan. She took care of the ship's maintenance, food supply, crew morale, and logistics. Under her. As a result, piracy turned into a well-run maritime business with great benefits and terrible HR policies instead of a romantic adventure. The result was quick. There were fewer mutinies, more profits, and ships worked together instead of against each other. When pirates stopped fighting each other and started fighting everyone else, it was a bad sign for everyone else in history. Fear wasn't the only thing that helped Jung Sao win. She won by keeping things in order. And once pirates learned that being under her command meant less, they stopped questioning her authority completely after she promised them stupid deaths and more money. She didn't need to wave a sword around. The system did the cutting itself. The pirate world stopped looking like a bunch of unruly ships and started looking like something much scarier, a real, color-coded, coordinated naval force called the Red Flag Fleet. This wasn't branding. This was running the business. Colored flags split up the fleet. Red was the biggest and strongest, and each squadron had its own routes, duties, and goals. This meant that pirates stopped accidentally attacking each other, which had been a fun thing to do before. It also meant that other fleets knew in advance when one fleet moved. Guesswork was replaced by coordination. Strategy took the place of vibes. With Jungo, piracy became organized. Ships didn't just sail around the sea like drunk seagulls hoping to run into merchant ships. They kept watch. They set up a blockade. They controlled narrow places. Pirate 4, don't even think about sailing here. Entire stretches of coastline became operational zones. And it worked. Merchants made trade. Ports paid for protection. Villages learned what flags meant, that they were willing to talk, and what flags meant that they had to do what they were told right away. The Red Flag Fleet didn't have to attack all the time. Just being there was enough. Every empire wants to win without fighting, or at least without fighting that isn't necessary. What scared governments the most wasn't the amount of ships. It was the discipline. Pirate fleets are supposed to fall apart when they are under stress. They should be fighting each other. They should be making mistakes. This one didn't. People followed the orders. People followed the signals. People set up retreats. Instead of making up heroic disasters, captains reported to their superiors. This was very disturbing for imperial officials who were watching from the shore. They were no longer dealing with criminals. They were up against a rival power, one who didn't care about paperwork but knew logistics all too well. And Zheng Yisao stayed far away through all of this. She didn't wave flags at the front of the ship. She didn't act like she was trying to scare people. She ran things from behind the scenes, giving orders, approving plans, and letting her system do the work. The pirates didn't need to see her all the time. They could feel her in the rules, the way things were set up, and the results. At this point, piracy was going on under Jungao. Wasn't a way of life. It was a job with benefits and a retirement plan that was very hard to get out of. There shouldn't be rules for pirates. That's sort of the brand. People who like rules are governments, monasteries, and people who like paperwork. People generally think that pirates are only driven by their impulses and bad decisions. Zheng Yisao didn't agree. One of her first and most radical decisions was to put in place a formal set of laws. Not vague suggestions or guidelines, but real rules with clear definitions. Punishments. This was a big deal. Pirates were used to captains making choices based on how they felt, how they thought they were better than others, or how long it had been since they had been insulted. With her system, behavior was no longer a risk. It was very easy to follow the rules. Don't follow orders. Execution, rob civilians. Execution, sexual assault. Death, right away, in public and not up for discussion. Hiding stolen things from the community pool. You got it right. This was not a change for the better. This was checking for quality. Jungo knew something very important. Unchecked. Being cruel is bad for business. Random violence makes merchants too scared to come to your waters at all. This means no loot. Attacking civilians makes governments want to get back at you. Theft within an organization leads to anger, rebellion, and backstabbing. Her rules didn't have anything to do with being nice. They were about getting things done quickly, and pirates were surprisingly happy about that. If you knew exactly where the line was, You could go right up to it without worrying about getting punished for no reason. The rules were the same for everyone, even the captains. That by itself was shocking. In the past, captains could get away with almost anything as long as people were afraid of them. Under Zheng Sao, rank did not protect people. It gave responsibility, which is a scary step up. Punishments were public for a reason, not to show off or teach. Everyone knew what would happen if the rules were broken. There was no confusion, no arguing, and no appeals to emotion. The system only spoke once and very clearly. The result was discipline right away. Pirates stopped working on their own. They stopped, scaring villages for no reason. They did what they were told. Loot went up, was fairly redistributed, and morale went up in a way that is very disturbing when criminals realize they are safer inside a system than outside it. People who weren't there thought this was terrible. Governments thought that pirates would fall apart under pressure. Instead, the harder they were pushed, the more organized they became. Young Isao had done something that no other pirate leader had ever done. She made it easy to see when people would break the law, and being able to predict what will happen it was more dangerous to have someone this skilled in charge than to have things go wrong. Fear is the most obvious reason why pirates followed Zheng Sao. And yes, fear was a factor. The punishments were real, immediate, and hard to forget. But fear alone won't keep tens of thousands of armed criminals together for long. In the short term, fear makes people do what they're told, but in the long term, it leads to rebellion. What really kept her pirates loyal was something much better. Things got better when she was in charge. Before, pirate leaders made it possible for people to live, not required. Captains made decisions without thinking. Ships fought even when they didn't have to. Someone wanted to make a point, and it cost crews their lives. Loot was unfairly split up, with the person who yelled the loudest or stabbed first getting the most. Yes, being a pirate meant freedom, but it also meant that your own side could kill you on a bad day. Junga took away that doubt. Pirates knew how much money they would make under her system. They were aware of the consequences of their actions. They knew which risks were worth taking and which weren't. This might sound boring, but boring is great when you work with cannon fire. She also knew how to use incentives. Better routes and bigger shares were given to skilled captains. Crews that did what they were told were safe from theft and random violence. Discipline not only kept things from getting out of hand, it also made piracy profitable again. She also cut down on dumb deaths, which was even more important. This is very important. Pirates did not think of dying in battle as romantic. People who never had to swab a deck made up that myth later. Real pirates wanted to stay alive, eat well, and retire somewhere warm with all their limbs intact. Under Zheng Yi Sao, the chances of survival went up a lot. Less pointless fighting, more planned attacks, and clean retreats when things went wrong. And then there was justice. Everyone had to follow her rules. Captains couldn't hurt crew members without getting in trouble. Less favoritism. Justice became steady, harsh, but easy to see coming. Pirates don't like rules, but they don't like random authority even more. So, do what you're told wasn't forced every day. It became a habit. At the height of her empire, pirates weren't following her because they were scared of her. A lot of people had never even met her. They did what she said because going outside of the system would have caused chaos, loss, and almost certain death. In the end, young Yao didn't act like a dictator yelling from the deck. She ruled like gravity, always there, impossible to argue with, and completely unforgiving if you didn't pay attention. Governments have been. People dealt with piracy like they deal with bad weather, not fun, annoying, and mostly unavoidable. Merchants complained that you lost a few ships. Officials didn't care, and life went on. Pirates were criminals, not business rivals. That calculation changed when Jungo came along. All of a sudden, trade routes stopped working as they should. Merchant ships disappeared or just didn't sail at all. Coastal towns quickly learned that it was cheaper to pay pirates than to trust the Navy. There was an unspoken rule that whole areas of the South China Sea had to follow. Understanding. You traded if the red flag fleet let you. You didn't if it didn't. This was not a problem. This caused problems in the economy. People in charge started to realize something very uncomfortable. They were no longer dealing with criminals who were all over the place. They were dealing with a separate power structure that collected taxes, enforced laws, and controlled land. This government, on the other hand, was able to move. Reports came in about pirate fleets that worked together to attack and then retreated, planned their moves, and came back exactly when they were supposed to. Pirates weren't supposed to act like this. Pirates were supposed to be reckless, messy, and always do the same thing. These ones worked well. Officials in the empire tried to give orders. They tried to make patrols more frequent. They tried to act like the problem wasn't that bad. That stage didn't last very long. Losses for merchants grew. The amount of money the government got from taxes went down because it was more important to them to be alive and working tomorrow. Local governments started to negotiate on their own, more important than being loyal to faraway bosses. And then there was the shame factor. Navies were made to fight other navies, not criminals who know the area better, have faster ships, and don't care about playing fair. Every time an engagement failed, things got worse. Each loss didn't just hurt the state financially, it made the pirates look like they were doing the right thing. This was the most frightening thing I learned. The pirates weren't trying to take over the government. They weren't making an announcement, revolutions, or saying they were sent by God. They were just doing their jobs so well that the state didn't have to be in charge. That's the worst case scenario. When people stop asking if the government can protect them and start asking if pirates will leave them alone, legitimacy quietly falls apart. No speeches or declarations, just a change in who people pay attention to. At this point, the question was no longer how to stop her. It was, how do we get through this without looking completely? Not having power, that's when the situation changed from policing to negotiation. When negotiations didn't work, governments did what they always do when they're embarrassed. They grabbed ships, uniforms, and a sense of confidence that they didn't really deserve. The Qing Navy got ready to fight the Red Flag Fleet head on, fully expecting that the pirate problem would go away once real warships showed up. No, it didn't. The Navy had all the advantages on paper: bigger ships, bigger guns, and more formal training, officers with medals, ranks, and cool hats. They didn't have any flexibility or real experience fighting an enemy that wouldn't act like a navy. Zheng's fleets didn't get ready for glorious battles. They did not say who they were. They didn't stay in one place. They attacked quickly, pulled back before reinforcements could get there, and disappeared into familiar coastal waters where imperial ships had trouble moving. When chased, pirate ships scattered like birds, only to come back together hours later, somewhere else entirely. The commanders of the Navy were very angry. How do you beat an enemy that won't stay still and insists on picking when, where, and whether to fight? Pirates also had very good intelligence, which was even worse. Local fishermen, traders, and coastal towns often warned the pirates about naval movements long before the ships got there. Fear was sometimes the reason. There were times when it was profit. Sometimes it was just being practical. The pirates were getting closer. The Navy was far away. People made smart choices. Engagement. After the engagement, things ended the same way. The Navy would come. The pirates would leave. Smaller imperial ships were cut off and taken. Larger ships had a hard time using their firepower against targets that were faster and easier to move. Every failure made the next mission harder because sailors quickly lost morale when they realized they were up against a smarter enemy. The damage to the mind was worse than the damage to the things. It starts to seem like a navy that can't beat pirates isn't needed. People in charge noticed. Merchants took note. Pirates definitely saw it. Every failed campaign made people more sure that the Red Flag Fleet was untouchable. Not unbeatable, but impossible to catch. And there is a difference. Zheng Sao didn't have to kill the Navy. She only had to make it useless. And she did it. The situation had completely changed by the time officials told the truth. The state was no longer stopping piracy. It was responding to it. And when a government reacts instead of controlling, the fight is already gone, even if no one is ready to say it out loud yet. At this point, something very bad had happened. People were no longer looking for Young Yao. They were keeping track of her. Instead of asking how to destroy her fleets, officials started asking how to avoid angering them. Merchant captains changed their routes based on pirate schedules, not the weather. People in coastal towns learned what flags meant that they should negotiate, and what flags meant that they should follow orders right away. This is usually the time in history when someone quietly says, "We might," lost control of the situation, and then pretended that was always the plan. Zheng Sao did something that most rebels, pirates, and warlords never do. She made it impossible to ignore her. She was in charge of shipping lanes. She was in charge of the food. She was in charge of information along the coast. And she did it without ever calling herself a ruler or claiming a throne. There were no crowns or announcements, just results. This made it very hard to fight her. Navies can fight armies. Governments can put down rebellions, but how do you fight a system that is already part of daily life? Take out the pirates and business stops. Take away the pirates and coastal protection goes away. Take away the pirates and all of a sudden, everyone remembers how bad the official navy was before all of this. At her best, Zheng Yao didn't have to give orders all the time. The structure she made worked on its own. Captains made sure people followed the rules. Crews did what they were supposed to do. Punishments happened on their own. Even loyalty turned into self-sustaining, because leaving would mean losing protection, income, and the ability to live. This is when she became really dangerous. Not when she had the most ships or won the most battles, but when she didn't have to prove anything anymore. Governments knew that even if they somehow destroyed part of her fleet, the rest would keep working, like trying to punch fog and being shocked when your hand stays wet. She wasn't the only thing that could go wrong. She was extra and maybe. The most disturbing thing was that she didn't seem to want to push any further. She didn't ask for land. She didn't try to take down the empire. She just was strong enough to stop trade, stable enough to keep it going, and smart enough not to go too far. This made it impossible for officials to choose. They could keep losing resources in a war they couldn't win, or they could accept that the strongest force in their waters wasn't wearing a uniform. And once that sank in, the next step became unavoidable: negotiation. After years of beating navies, making officials look bad, and running the most successful pirate group in history, Zhang Yao did something that no pirate story has ever prepared you for. She came to a stop, not because she was losing or because she had been betrayed, not because the empire suddenly got brave. She stopped working. This is the part of every pirate story that ends with blood, betrayal, or a noose. This is something that has happened a lot in the past. Pirates aren't supposed to get old gracefully. They should die loudly and teach moral lessons. Yung Yisao didn't care about this whole tradition and did the most rebellious thing possible. He quit while he was ahead. At this point, the Qing government knew something that made them uneasy. They could keep fighting her forever, costing them ships, money, and credibility. They could also accept the truth and talk to the woman who had already beaten them in every way that mattered. They did what they said they would do. People started talking carefully and quietly, like they do when they are trying to work out a deal with someone who doesn't have to agree with them at all. Zhang Yisao paid attention. She didn't beg. She didn't make threats. She just made it clear that she had choices and time. Her terms were bold. She wanted amnesty for herself and her followers, the right to keep her money, protection for her people from being prosecuted again, and the government to admit defeat without saying so. And this is the part that historians still don't get. The government agreed. They didn't enjoy it. They didn't celebrate it, but they did sign it, because at that point, the choice wasn't between giving up and winning. It was either controlled peace or never-ending shame. This was strange for pirates who had always thought they would be betrayed. They weren't going to kill their leader. She wasn't going to jail. She wasn't being removed. People were recognizing her. Jenny Sao left piracy, not in chains, but with the law on her side. No big last stand, no. No betrayal at sea, no gallows. She was just a woman who looked at the situation, figured out the odds, and decided that the best thing to do was to stop playing. That might be the most pirate thing she ever did. The amnesty deal was not a kindness. It was a confession. The Qing government didn't show any kindness when they agreed to Yunga's terms. They were being practical. Empires don't talk to criminals unless those criminals have already won. And by this point, Yung Yao had won so completely that the state was just picking the least embarrassing way out. The fact that she accepted amnesty doesn't make this moment special. It's how much she kept. She did not give up her money. She didn't give up her ships in shame. She didn't go into exile quietly. Her followers were let go. Many of them joined the official navy, which is a strange thing to say out loud. Pirates who had been making fun of imperial troops for years were now wearing uniforms. Proof that if you can't beat someone, you might as well hire them. And Junga herself was free, rich, and respected enough that no one dared to touch her after that. This was not letting go. This was holding back. The empire wasn't paying her. It made sure she never had a reason to come back. The transition was very smooth, which is impressive. There was no last-minute betrayal, no sudden arrests, and no mysterious disappearances. Many rulers in history have promised mercy, but given chains instead. This was not one of those tales. The government kept its word because breaking it would have been dangerous, both in terms of military and symbolic meaning. Zheng Yisao had already shown that power without legitimacy fails. The government didn't want to remind people of that lesson again. And then she disappeared from the world of pirates. No one is fighting back, and there are no splinter groups trying to bring her empire back. No big comeback because she took apart her own system the right way. Orders were given, ships were moved around, and crews were sent away. Piracy didn't go crazy. It went away. That alone shows how much power she had. This wasn't the end of a pirate empire. The pirate empire was shutting down. The state got the sea back, but not because it won. It got it back because she let it, on her terms, at the time that was best for her. The majority of pirates die fighting empires. Jungo made an empire face reality, which might be the most powerful thing that happens in the whole story. After taking apart the strongest pirate, by making an empire negotiate its own shame and forcing the biggest empire in history to do so, Yung Sao did something that was very scandalous for pirates. She calmed down. No dramatic exile, no secret island fortress, and no constant worry about being betrayed. She opened a gambling house, which is a perfect fit. After years of dealing with pirates, running a business where people give you money and argue about the rules probably felt good, compared to running fleets and making navies look bad, dealing. It must have seemed nice to know what would happen with gamblers. She lived openly, comfortably, and peacefully, and maybe the most disturbing thing of all was that no one bothered her. No one was looking for her. Nobody tried to kill her. Years later, no officials came forward to say that there was a small technical problem with the amnesty paperwork. The deal stayed in place because everyone involved knew something very clearly. It would be a bad idea to bother her peace. History has a hard time with this part of her life. Chroniclers lose interest when the violence stops. There are no wars to talk about or betrayals to act out. She was just a woman who lived longer than her enemies, enjoyed her money, and watched the world go by. And that's why this ending is so important. A lot of pirate stories are warnings. They are there to show you what happens when you go against the law. You get caught. You are put to death. Things are back to normal. Learned a lesson. That story is ruined by Yong Yisao. She went against the law. One made a deal, retired, and lived. No punishment that is moral. There was no tragic downfall. Instead, competence was rewarded with survival. That makes people feel bad. It suggests that people with titles or uniforms don't always have power. You can build that authority, not get it from someone else. That systems are more important than bravado, and that sometimes the best move isn't to fight one last time. It's knowing when to stop. People didn't think of her as a pirate queen in her later years. People looked up to her as a businesswoman. She had been a fearsome pirate on the sea and had smoothly moved into civilian life with the quiet confidence of someone who had already beaten the system once. No one asked her about her past. No one tried her patience, because they all remembered what happened the last time she tried to plan something. A lot of pirates have lived in history. There were loud pirates, violent pirates, pirates who died screaming, pirates who were betrayed, and pirates who became cautionary tales told by governments to scare people into obeying. And then there was Zheng Yao. She wasn't more violent than any other pirate, which is why no one ever beat her. A lot of them were worse. It's not because she had better luck. A lot of pirates had lucky runs. It's because she knew something that almost everyone else didn't. Piracy isn't about going against the law. It's all about systems. Most pirates wanted to be free. Jungo wanted stability. Most pirates lived in the moment. She made plans for years to come. Fear was the main way that most pirates kept people in line. She ruled through structure, and fear just happened to come with it. She didn't make piracy sound romantic. She made it a job. She got rid of the nonsense, the ego, and the pointless violence and put in place rules that worked. People followed those rules because they worked, not because they were inspired, but because life under her command was better than the other option. That's what makes her legacy hard to deal with. She wasn't a tragic hero who was crushed by power. She wasn't a bad person who was killed by justice. She wasn't even a revolutionary trying to make the world a better place. She was a manager, and she was really good at it. That's why historians have trouble putting her in the right place. She doesn't fit the moral standards we like. She shows that power doesn't always come from titles, crowns, or being right. Sometimes it comes from knowing how people really act and making systems that work with that instead of acting like people are better than they are. Other pirates burned brightly and then vanished. Yo leveled up, made the game better, and then left it on their own terms. She made an empire negotiate not because of its beliefs, but because it was tired. She didn't bring down the system, she made it work for her. And then she left. There is no execution, no downfall, and no moral punishment at the end of the story. She was just a woman who saw the world as it was, understood it better than anyone else, and used that knowledge to win. This may be the most unsettling pirate story of all. The Renaissance liked to call itself a rebirth, a return to the light, after the dark times of the Middle Ages. Marble statues came out of the ruins. Paintings learned how to show depth and emotion, and scholars talked with respect about reason, balance, and the potential of people. It seemed like civilization had finally grown up on the outside. But if you look past that shiny surface, you'll find something much less enlightened. A world where power was weak, fear was always present, and death often came without a weapon or a fight. In Renaissance courts, being brave and smart were less important for survival, more on how well it digests. Kings, popes, dukes, and rich merchants all knew that the person pouring their wine was the most dangerous person in the room. Politics was personal. Rivals did not yell at each other from across fields. They ate together, got married, had babies, and slept in the same bed. Poison was the best way to get rid of them because they were so close together. It was quiet, private, and easy to deny, and best of all, it let everyone act like nothing violent had happened. People in this time were very concerned with how things looked. When the victim was strong enough, public executions were frowned upon. Open murder led to scandals, vendettas, and questions that were hard to answer. Poison, on the other hand, kept things polite. A man could get sick, a woman could die. The court quietly and solemnly changed the seating arrangement, even though a rival could die naturally. After all, tragedy was much better than guilt. What made poison so scary was how well it fit into everyday life. Medicine and murder had the same tools, methods, and sometimes the same people who do it. Apothecaries sold medicines that could just as easily kill. Doctors gave patients drugs that were very close to being a treatment and an execution. Cosmetics promised beauty, but they slowly hurt health. In a culture where knowledge was growing faster than morals, dosage became fate. People who were afraid tasted food. During the meal, people switched cups. Rings were made with secret compartments. People were suspicious of gloves, books, and even holy objects. Trust was hard to find, and loyalty didn't last long. Everyone knew someone who got sick out of the blue, and everyone had their own ideas about why. The Renaissance was a time when people celebrated the mind, but it also showed how much people want to be in charge. Poison was more than just a weapon, it was a way of thinking. It let leaders change the future without looking mean. It let ambition work behind a mask of politeness, and it thrived because the time thought it was too civilized for violence. This was the Renaissance's strange truth. While artists painted angels and philosophers talked about virtue, power moved through kitchens, makeup, and medicine chests. The time didn't stop being violent. It just learned how to dissolve it, stir it gently, and serve it in a cup. Poison didn't work during the Renaissance, because people were mean. It worked because people thought they were being logical. People in this time were drunk on learning, trying new things, and the idea that if you studied nature closely enough, you could control it. Alchemy became less clear. Chemistry and medicine were similar to philosophy, and people were often more curious than careful. In that setting, poison wasn't a secret art. It made sense for Renaissance science to go this way. Poison, on the other hand, needed time and planning. Unlike a sword or a dagger, it required an understanding of plants, minerals, and how the body reacts. Arsenic, mercury, belladonna, and hemlock. These weren't strange things. They were common things that were talked about in scholarly texts and sold by reputable apothecaries. It didn't matter what the substance was, the dose, not the thing itself. Grains could tell the difference between a cure and a dead body. Because of this uncertainty, poison became frighteningly respectable. A doctor could give a patient a compound to help their humors get back in balance while also speeding up their decline. Symptoms were often like those of other common illnesses: fever, throwing up, feeling weak, and losing weight. Death came slowly, politely, and with a way to deny it. There were no screams or blood, just a body that failed, one organ at a time. People in the Renaissance thought the body was a system, controlled by balance. Poison and disease both threw that balance off. Because of that overlap, it was hard to prove accusations and easy to throw them out. Was it murder or just fate if a rival died? Courts didn't want to ask, asking me to admit weakness, and being weak made people panic. The true peril was not ignorance, but overconfidence. Educated elites had faith in their doctors, their cosmetics, their food, and their home remedies. They thought that knowing things kept them safe. It really made them easy to guess. A man who took daily tonics could slowly become poisonous. A woman who used beauty products could be exposed for months. Familiar routines turned into perfect ways to deliver. In the meantime, safety measures just made people more paranoid. Food tasters lowered the risk, but didn't get rid of it completely. A delayed toxin could be worse for them. Switching cups during meals became common, which only made people more suspicious instead of safer. The court turned into a place of distrust, where everyone watched everyone else, looking for signs of guilt in their coughs. Fits and skin that is pale. Poison did well because it fit with how people thought during the Renaissance. It was smart, subtle, and effective. It gave more credit to planning than to strength. And most importantly, it made people think that death was still a natural part of life, even though it had been carefully measured, mixed, and served by people. The court was the best place for poison to be used as a weapon. Renaissance courts were like cities full of people who wanted to get ahead, were jealous of each other, and were forced to be close to each other. Everyone watched everyone else because everyone needed favors, protection, marriages, and help from others to stay alive. You couldn't just ignore your enemies. You ate with them, prayed with them, and smiled when they told you how healthy you were. By today's standards, these courts weren't very big. Power was very close to the ruler, and getting to the ruler was more important than armies. A word whispered in the right ear could be worth more than 1,000 soldiers. That closeness made it hard to be violent directly. Too many questions came up when someone stabbed a rival in a hallway. Poison elegantly solved that problem. It worked best in places where people had to trust each other and there was no privacy. Eating together was a way to connect with others and make a political statement. Who sat where? Who got served first? Who filled the wine? Every little thing had a meaning. These were also the times when they were most vulnerable. Many people handled the food before it got to the table. Every step is a chance. Kitchens were busy, hierarchical places where servants could be bribed, threatened, or quietly replaced. One changed dish could change the future of a state. But not all of the poison came from below. A lot of the time, it moved sideways or down. Family members, spouses, siblings, and even kids were all possible suspects. Dynastic politics made family members dangerous. An heir who was hard to deal with, a wife who was fertile, or a cousin who was a rival all showed instability. Taking them away quietly kept up appearances and stopped open conflict. People could show their grief. People might not want to ask questions. The psychological impact was damaging. People who worked in the court became obsessed with reading bodies. A cough. Got suspicious. People started talking about weight loss. People started to wonder why they were so tired all of a sudden. Sickness was no longer a secret. It was news about politics. A dying man could start a fight for power long before he died, making poisoning both a cause and a way to start chaos. The more refined a court became, the more dangerous it became. Manners took the place of armor. Steel was replaced by silk. But violence didn't go away. It just changed. Cups, gloves, powders, and perfumes all had power in them. No assassination. It didn't take strength or bravery anymore, just access and timing. In this setting, poison was more than just a way to kill. It was a way to talk to each other, work out who would take over, settle arguments, and remind everyone that they needed to be careful to stay alive. The court was not a safe place. It was a hunting ground that was quiet, elegant, and always on the lookout for the moment when a rival got weak enough to fall. Poison didn't always come in a cup. It was sometimes brushed on the skin, dabbed behind the ears, or dusted across. The face for the sake of beauty. The Renaissance's obsession with looks made an unexpected path to death, one that was slow, quiet, and almost loving. Cosmetics were not just for looks. They were chemical experiments that people wore every day, and women were the most at risk. People wanted pale skin. It meant that you were rich, had free time, and didn't have to work outside. Women used powders and creams with lead, mercury, and arsenic in them to get it. These things worked for a short time. The faces looked smooth and bright, but the body was taking in toxins that hurt organs, made the immune system weaker, and slowly took away life. Beauty was literally killing them. What made this especially dangerous was the intent. Some cases of cosmetic poisoning were not accidents. People kept their beauty routines to themselves, did them over and over, and trusted them. A maid made creams. A trusted friend gave powders. A husband pushed for treatments. People didn't notice small changes. Symptoms came on slowly: headaches, hair loss, shaking, and tiredness. Nothing dramatic, but nothing that can be proven, just a body slowly failing. Women at court were watched very closely. Loyalty, obedience, and fertility were more important than living a long time. A woman who could no longer have children or whose health got worse could be replaced. Poison through cosmetics was a way to keep your dignity while getting rid of the problem. No scandal, no charge, just weak health, then mourning, and then remarriage. Men were not immune, but they were less likely to get sick. People knew about their power and routines. Women's power, when it operated in private and intimate settings, the places where poison worked best: bedrooms, changing rooms, and bathrooms. These were places where people had power, but they were also places where they could be hurt. Medical advice only made things worse. Doctors gave patients treatments that made them more toxic. More ointment was needed for a rash. Tiredness meant tonics. Because they didn't know everything, but were sure of themselves, each remedy made things worse. Harm persisted under the guise of care. Poison in this form blurred moral boundaries. Limits. Was it murder if the person who died did it themselves? Was it mean if everyone thought it was pretty? Responsibility faded into the background. Death was no one's fault. During the Renaissance, power didn't always kill quickly. It would wait sometimes, smile at a woman's pale skin, and praise her elegance, all while knowing that the cost would be paid slowly, quietly, and without witnesses. During the Renaissance, the people who were most trusted to keep life going were often the ones who are best able to do it. Apothecaries and doctors had a strange place in society. They were well educated, respected, and very dangerous. They knew how to use things that scared most people, and they did so behind a wall of professional authority and Latin terms. When poison entered the body disguised as medicine, people didn't usually suspect it. Apothecaries kept shelves full of roots, resins, minerals, and powders that came from all over Europe and beyond. A lot of these ingredients were toxic by nature. Arsenic was common. Mercury was in style. Opium made pain go away, but made decisions harder. Belladonna calmed muscles, but stopped hearts. Measurement was the only thing that kept cure from turning into disaster, and humans were in charge of measurement. Doctors were taught that they were restoring balance, not stopping death. Humors, temperaments, and cosmic influences were at the heart of Renaissance medicine. When a patient got worse, it was usually because of fate, imbalance, or divine will, not the treatment. This idea, the system, made the perfect cover. A patient who had been poisoned didn't look like they had been killed. It seemed like they had been misdiagnosed. There was a big difference in power between the patient and the doctor. When they were sick, elite patients trusted their doctors without question, especially when their health threatened their job or legacy. A sick ruler became weak and open to attack. A doctor who sped up that decline could change the order of succession without using a sword. And because doctors could easily move between homes, they had the best access. Apothecaries, on the other hand, worked at where business and secrecy meet. They made compounds in secret, recorded recipes only when they wanted to, and only answered to their customers. Changing the way you prepare something a little bit could make a big difference. Too much of an ingredient, made too often, and delivered over weeks instead of days. This was death by the rules. Not all of the practitioners were bad. A lot of people thought they were helping, but the system rewarded being careful instead of being responsible. There weren't many autopsies. There was no toxicology. If a body failed, and then explanations came easily. Weak constitution, sadness, and bad air. Fear and cynicism grew in this setting. Powerful people hired several doctors to compare prescriptions and look for inconsistencies. Some doctors changed every few weeks. Some people took preventative antidotes every day, poisoning themselves a little bit in the hopes of getting used to it. Survival turned into a race for medical weapons. Medicine and murder were not opposites during the Renaissance. They were next door to each other. And sometimes they had the same. The idea that a prescription pad could be used to kill someone became a part of political life. Survival strategies developed concurrently. The upper class of the Renaissance did not just sit around and wait for death to come. They got ready by arming themselves with countermeasures, antidotes, tasters, rituals, and habits that made them feel like they were in charge. The word that stood out was impression. The most obvious defense was the food tasters. A trusted servant tasted the food before it got to the table, showing loyalty with every bite. But poison changed quickly. Some toxins worked slowly, while others built up over time. A taster might live through the first spoonful, but the intended victim would eat a whole portion over weeks. Protection turned into theater, comforting, but not complete. Another thing they were obsessed with was antidotes. The most well-known was thiac, a complicated mix of many things, such as opium, herbs, spices, and sometimes snake flesh. It promised to keep you safe from almost everything, like poison, disease, and bad moods. It was hard to find and cost a lot of money, and not very helpful most of the time. But rulers ate it religiously because they thought that complexity meant power. The cure had to be even more advanced than the poison. Some powerful people used controlled poisoning. They took small amounts of toxins on a regular basis in the hopes of getting used to them. The idea behind the logic made sense. In real life, it hurt organs, made bodies weaker, and cut lives short. But it made people feel better, which was often more important in Renaissance politics than health. People's behavior changed as well. During the meal, cups were switched. People shared food in public to show they trusted each other. The dishes were made simpler. People didn't trust spices because they hid flavors. Even being nice to people became risky. Taking gifts of food or drink was risky. It was rude to turn them down. Every conversation became a math problem. Paranoia changed how people lived their lives every day. Investigations were started because of illness. Servants were questioned. Doctors were fired. Kitchens were rearranged. And people still died because poison thrived not on ignorance, but on routine. People's behavior became more predictable as they built more systems to protect themselves. The biggest lie was that knowing something made you safe. People in the Renaissance thought that education, science, and being ready made them immune. Poison worked because it didn't care about any of those rules. It took advantage of people's trust, habits, and the need to feel like we're in charge. Antidotes did not eradicate fear. They made it a part of the system. They made survival a daily habit, one swallow at a time, while reminding everyone at the table that civilization, no matter how much it learned and improved, was still weak enough to be destroyed by one measured dose. By the end of the Renaissance, poison was so deeply ingrained in political thought that almost every important death raised suspicions. When a powerful person got sick, the question wasn't if poison was involved anymore. It was who had given it to them and if they had been smart enough to get away with it. Being sick itself became circumstantial evidence. Symptoms were looked at closely, like papers from the court. Sudden vomiting pointed to one thing. Lingering weakness pointed to another. People said that a ruler who got worse over time had been worked on, and one who died quickly had been poisoned in a careless way. These were not medical diagnoses. They were political readings. Usefulness was more important than facts. What made poison so appealing was not only its efficacy, but also its ambiguity. It was impossible to fully prove that someone died from poison, so it was impossible to fully punish them. There were rumors of accusations, freely, and often used as a weapon after the fact. Poison must have been involved if a succession went wrong. Someone must have cheated nature if a rival family grew too quickly. Easy illnesses made hard problems easier to deal with. A sickly heir made it okay to skip the line of succession. A spouse who was dying made room for a more strategic marriage. A pope who was losing power made plans long before the conclave met. Poison didn't just kill people, it changed the order of time, speeding up results that could have taken years. In public, decorum was kept. Funerals were serious. Eulogies praised the good and the will of God. Everyone knew what the subtext meant in private. People were careful about how they mourned the dead because saying the wrong thing could make you look guilty or next. Being quiet became a way to stay alive. Even when poison was suspected, it was still dangerous to try to get justice. Pointing the finger at the wrong person made them angry. To accuse the right person, you needed proof that wasn't there. It's better to let rumors spread quietly, which hurts people's reputations, without causing violence. Poison kept working even after the victim was buried in this way. People in the Renaissance thought they had moved on from the violence of the Middle Ages. It had really perfected something even colder. Death didn't need a show anymore. It needed the right timing, a lot of patience, and a story that made sense. Illness gave that story, which was respectable, familiar, and always adaptable. Poison was no longer shocking by the end of the time. People thought it would happen, and that may have been its biggest success. A whole political. People learned that power could change hands not only through war or law, but also when bodies failed at the most convenient time. The poison didn't stop working when the person died. That was when it really started to have an effect in many ways. Long after the bodies were buried, poison lived on as rumors, accusations, and bad reputations. It changed the way people remembered, the way families were judged, and the way history was written. In the Renaissance, dying by poison was not the end. It was a story weapon. Because it was almost impossible to prove something, memory became flexible. People remembered a cruel ruler as a poisoner. A family that got rich too quickly got a bad name. These accusations were especially dangerous for women. Intelligence, ambition, or influence could be seen as cunning and cruel behavior. Poison was the best way to explain power that made people feel bad. Fear made people more likely to lie. A single suspected poisoning could affect many generations. There were problems with marriage negotiations. Alliances were thought about again. Even doctors who were linked to suspicious deaths had invisible stains. Reputation became like property that you could pass down, but it was harder to get rid of. This environment changed how people acted. People acted innocent in a rude way. People became more religious. Charity became a strategy. Bodies were on display for longer. Deathbeds were set up to look natural, respectful, and well attended. A peaceful passing was a political stunt meant to put an end to rumors before they spread. Made. The more people were afraid of poison, the more they thought about it. Not every disease was a murder. Not all deaths were planned. Life expectancy was low, sanitation was bad, and medicine during the Renaissance was not very good. But poison told a story that met emotional needs. It made loss mean something. It put the blame on someone. It brought back a sense of order to a world where death seemed random. Poison's effects on the afterlife also had an effect on the law. Courts were hesitant to prosecute those suspected of poisoning because failure meant being embarrassed in public. To be successful, you had to shake up powerful families. Being quiet was still the safest choice. This unwillingness made poison even more appealing. A crime that changed the balance of power without getting in trouble. Poison turned into a mirror in the end. It showed how worried people were in a time when they were torn between faith and science, and between violence and civility. The Renaissance thought it had made violence more civilized. Poison showed that violence had just learned how to behave better, and that fear, once it was introduced into a society, could last much longer than any poison in the blood. Poison didn't go away when the Renaissance did, even though it did end. The way of thinking that made it seem okay, even smart, faded, not the method itself. Poison thrived in a world where people cared a lot about control, looks, and being able to deny things that were likely to happen. And those values didn't go away when the way art looked or the way scientists talked got better. What the Renaissance did best was not chemistry, but being careful. It taught people in later generations that power could be used without being seen. That influence could be kept without a show. That violence could be clean, quiet, and seen as nature doing its thing. In this way, poison was more of a lesson than a weapon, and it was deeply ingrained in political culture. As forensic science progressed, the enigma surrounding poison diminished. More and more people were doing autopsies. It got better at finding chemicals. But by that time, the principle had already moved. Political assassination learned new ways to happen. Fake illnesses, medical mistakes made by the government, carelessness. The Renaissance showed that killing was only one part of the act. Making the story fit was more important. There is also a darker side to how people remember medicine. The time made healing and harm so hard to tell apart that people were still suspicious long after things got better. People only trusted doctors sometimes. People questioned the treatments. Power was no longer absolute. That fear-based skepticism eventually became the basis for modern medical ethics. Proof that paranoia can sometimes lead to advance. The psychological effect may have been the most lasting. The Renaissance poison culture taught the elite to think defensively, to expect betrayal, and to see closeness as a threat. That way of thinking became institutions, protocols, and habits that still exist today. Food testing, medical oversight, and security systems all come from a time when people learned how weak power really was. The Renaissance celebrated what people could do. Poison showed what people could and couldn't do. It showed how easy it is to learn, leans toward control, how refinement doesn't get rid of cruelty, it just hides it. There was a quiet death that no one wanted to talk about for every great painting. In the end, poison's biggest success wasn't the people it killed, but the trust it broke. No matter how enlightened a time thinks it is, it can never fully escape the fear that someone, somewhere, is still stirring something into the cup once trust is gone. Roman baths weren't just for cleaning people. That was the reason. The real goal was much bigger: to organize Roman society without walls, speeches, or laws. The bathhouse became a way to let off steam in a city full of people, noise, ambition, and worry. Yes, dirt came off the skin, but so did lies, secrets, and sometimes even restraint. Rome was crowded, hot, and always open to the public. Most people lived in small apartments that didn't have their own water supply. At best, washing at home was a hassle. At worst, it was impossible. The baths fixed that, but they also made something new. A daily event on that got people out of their homes and into a public space where everyone could see each other. This was clean social engineering. The lines between daily life and the baths blurred. Senators and shopkeepers soaked together. Poets and retired soldiers sat on the same benches. Freedmen and elites walked by each other, naked and sweating, just inches apart under the same veined ceilings. At the door, the most obvious sign of status, clothing, was taken off. What was left was the body, and Romans were very hard on bodies. Scars told stories. Softness made people think of indulgence. Strength suggested self-control. The baths were a quiet checkup. This seeming equality was not real. Rome never really forgot about hierarchy. Rich customers came with slaves to carry oils, towels, and extra sandals. People who were poor came alone and borrowed what they could or made do without. Everyone came in naked. But not everyone came in with the same level of confidence. The baths blurred the lines between classes just enough to make things tense, and that tension fueled talk. The conversation was worth more than money. People heard the news the fastest in the baths. There were rumors about politics going around in the steam clouds. People talked about business deals in a casual way. Rivalries between people got worse. You could find out who was getting better, who was sick, who was broke, or who was sleeping with whom by listening in the baths. There was something wrong with the silence. The state knew how to use this power. Emperors paid for huge bath complexes not because they were nice, but because it was smart. People who took regular baths were calmer, healthier, and easier to take care of. It was also more distracted. People were less likely to complain as long as the water was hot and the marbles shone. Roman baths were not a way to get away from people. They were the people, shortened, out in the open, and always talking. There was more to a Roman bath than just a bunch of pools. It was a carefully planned experience that was meant to subtly guide bodies and behavior. Architecture took over as soon as you walked in. Changes in temperature, doors, and hallways. Directed movement like a script that wasn't spoken. You didn't walk around the baths, you went after them. The order was planned. The body got ready in warm rooms. The hot rooms made it sweat, and cold plunges brought it back to life. This progression wasn't just about being clean, it was about the beat. The Romans thought that routine helped people be disciplined, and the bathhouse taught that discipline every day. The body learned to obey by going through heat and cold, giving up comfort in stages. These areas were designed to be seen. Sound was louder in rooms with high ceilings. Steam made faces hard to see, but carried voices. Benches and pools made people get close. The point was that you couldn't easily hide. The baths made people want to hang out, loiter, and watch. The Forum was where people in Rome argued in public, and the baths were where they watched in private. Movement through the bath was like life in Rome. You went in together, moved forward together, and left together. The time of day was important too. Certain times brought in certain groups of people, politicians early, workers later, and social climbers whenever they thought someone important might show up. The baths became predictable, and that made them useful. It was also on purpose that they were luxurious. People were reminded of imperial power by the marble floors, painted walls, and carved statues. You were surrounded by signs of order and control, even when you were naked and defenseless. The message was always there, but not too obvious. Rome gives. Rome puts things in order. Rome will never end. Cleanliness turned into propaganda. But comfort came with stress. The longer you stayed, the more physically and socially exposed you became. People started talking casually and then got more serious. Alliances were made. Enemies took note of weaknesses. The way the baths were set up kept people in shared time, which made them talk to each other without fighting. Even the exits were important. Leaving together made it possible to keep talking. Leaving alone made people wonder. The bathhouse went beyond its walls, changing how people met on the streets and in their homes. The Roman bath wasn't built for cleanliness. It was architecture for routine, and in Rome, habit was one of the best ways to keep people in line. Rome never stopped measuring people, even though it talked a lot about shared citizenship. The bathhouse, which had no clothes or titles, just found new ways to rank everyone. The body itself became the resume in a place where everyone was naked. Everyone could see every scar, muscle, wrinkle, and softness. A soldier's body told a different story. Calloused hands, old wounds, and a disciplined way of standing told of service and staying power. A worker's body told another. Strong, worn, and useful, shaped by doing things over and over instead of by glory. People thought that the body of an elite man should look controlled but not worked. Too soft meant too much. Too muscular made it seem like they did manual labor. Roman ideals lived in small spaces. Status also followed people into the baths in less subtle ways. Rich customers came with attendants who brought oil flasks, towels, sandals, and stridles. These slaves stayed close by, scraping sweat off of, using scented oils, and keeping an eye on their things. Their presence made their rank known more clearly than any ring or toga. Poorer bathers didn't bring anything but themselves. They borrowed tools or scraped dry with their hands. How you bathed showed what class you were in. The smell of far-off provinces and careful trade came from expensive oils. Cheap oils had a strong local smell. Some bathers stayed for a while, feeling at home in the space. Others quickly washed up and left, knowing that being seen for a long time would lead to judgment. Women's baths were similar in many ways, even though sources don't talk about them as much. People looked at women's bodies just as closely, and their reputations were even more important. Just by being there, standing, and being with friends, a woman could start gossip before she even spoke. There wasn't much privacy. There was no interpretation. The baths were also places where people could show off their status. They picked their conversations carefully. People casually dropped names. Compliments were a way to hide alliances. Silence could mean either safety or danger. People learned to read these cues early on because getting them wrong could be expensive. But the BS never really got rid of the hierarchy. They made fun of equality, but didn't give it to them. That was the point of the tension. Rome let people mix just enough to keep their dreams alive, just enough visibility to remind everyone of their place. Status didn't go away in the steam and sweat. It changed. The bathhouse became one of Rome's best classrooms because it taught people every day how much other people thought they were worth. If gossip was the blood in Rome's body, the baths were the place where it spread the fastest. Steam made people talk as well as it made muscles relax. People started talking about aches, the weather, or the temperature of the water, but those topics didn't last long. In a place where privacy was impossible and silence felt wrong, talking became both a shield and a weapon. People who would never hang out together otherwise came together at the baths. That closeness made things possible. Before official announcements, news from the forum started to come in. A senator got sick. talked about while he was still alive. Before the merchant's creditors got there, they knew he was bankrupt. Here is where affairs, betrayals, promotions, and demotions first came to light, all wrapped in casual language and half smiles. Gossip spread because it was helpful. In Rome, information was money, and the baths were a place to trade. Speaking and listening were equally important. Knowing when to spread a rumor and when not to could make or break a career. Someone who hears the wrong comment could spread it far beyond the marble walls. Walls. The setting made it so that the steam made faces blurry, but voices clear. You couldn't tell who was listening, which made every sentence dangerous. People learned to hint instead of accuse by speaking indirectly. The speaker was safe because they used phrases like, "I've heard," or "they say," which let the rumor do its job. Responsibility disappeared into the air. Gossip about politics was very dangerous. People might think emperors were nice in public, but people talked about them behind their backs in the baths. That didn't mean that people were not careful. This meant they were smart. People framed their complaints as concerns. The praise was so over the top that it sounded ironic. Even when they were pretending not to, everyone knew how to play. People's personal lives were not safe. The baths showed off bodies, and bodies inspired stories. Gaining weight suggested giving in. Being suddenly thin could mean you were sick or stressed. People wondered what the marks on the skin meant. Nothing was missed, and everything was understood. The end result was a strange closeness. You could learn everything there is to know about a man. Reputation without ever talking to him directly. The baths made people feel comfortable with each other, but not friends, and they learned things without trusting each other. Rome valued order, but gossip thrived in its cracks. In the warm, echoing rooms of the baths, those cracks grew wider, whispered into steam, spread out, and let loose into the city, where reputations rose and fell long before anyone dried off. There was never a politically neutral Roman bathhouse. It was only pretending to be. Under the marble and steam, power moved quietly, testing loyalties and checking ambition. The baths were a rare thing in Roman life. Access, not formal access, with doors and titles keeping people out, but accidental access. The kind that happened when two naked men sat on the same bench, both wet and naked. Politicians were well aware of this benefit. The forum had a public and performative conversation. The talk in the baths seemed casual, like it wouldn't hurt anyone. That illusion made it risky. Deals were hinted at instead of being made public. Help was suggested, not guaranteed. A nod, a shared complaint, or a moment of agreement in the heat could mean more than a speech ever could. Timing was important. If you get there early, you might run into senators and judges before their day gets too busy and they become more cautious. If you got there later, you would have met business people, contractors, and local power brokers. The baths turned into a rotating map of Roman power, and skilled men learned exactly when to show up. Even emperors took part with care. When a ruler took a bath in public, it was a planned move. Show of confidence and openness. He showed that he wasn't afraid of being killed or insulted, but being so close came with a risk. People could remember everything that was said near an emperor. It was possible to understand every reaction. Being there was a political act in and of itself. The baths were a chance for people who weren't at the top. A well-timed comment could get people to come back. People might have noticed a show of loyalty. Someone who shows restraint might be seen as trustworthy. In Rome, getting ahead often didn't depend on merit than on visibility, and the baths gave people a chance to show off every day. But there was danger here too. You could lose your job if you say the wrong thing or are overheard. It took less time for jokes about leadership to spread than it did for apologies. Political foes listened closely and kept track of things they didn't like for later use. The BS gave smart people rewards, but punished careless ones. This is how Roman politics got into the water. The BS made bodies softer, but minds sharper. They taught people how to use power in a subtle way, how to talk without making a promise, and how to listen without reacting. By the time the others got dressed and dried off, decisions had already been made. Alliances had gotten stronger. Rivalries had either cooled down or gotten worse. People in Rome did most of their work not in marble halls or crowded forums, but between the pools, where ambition floated quietly, waiting for the right time to come up. Roman baths were surprisingly private places for a society that cared so much about order and reputation. There were bodies on display, heat blurred the lines, and clothes and distance didn't matter. Exist. This didn't make the baths a mess, but it did make them places full of potential. In Rome, being naked didn't always mean being sexual, but it never meant nothing. How someone stood, moved, or looked at you was important. People noticed confidence. Being awkward made people judge you. The baths let people see each other in their most natural state, which made people want each other. Curiosity and guesswork. Flirting in the baths was not obvious. Open advances could cause a scandal, but signals were all over the place. Lingering looks, conversations that went on for too long, compliments that were meant to be funny, and offers to talk about something else. Because everything happened in public, being discreet became part of the appeal. It was a skill to be noticed without being seen. These dynamics were true for both men and women and across social lines. Even though many baths were separated by time or space, there were times when they crossed over and rumors spread. Desire did not vanish, even in single-gender environments. Roman attitudes towards sexuality were complicated, based on a hierarchy, and very much related to power. Who wanted whom was less important than who was in charge of the conversation. The baths allowed people to deny what they did. It was possible to say that encounters were accidental. People could say that conversations were harmless. Crowded benches could be to blame for being close to each other. This lack of clarity protected reputations while still letting people get to know each other. The baths also made people pay more attention. People started to wonder why you were always with the same person. Absence invited.